There are men in the American military whose names never appear in press releases, whose deployments are never announced, whose units don't officially exist in any document that a civilian will ever read. Men who have spent careers going into places that couldn't happen and doing things that didn't occur. The commander had been one of those men for 19 years. 11 combat deployments, 3 theaters, decorations that were classified at the time of their award and remain classified today. A career built in the spaces between what the military acknowledges and what it actually does. A career that had earned him, through a succession of increasingly dangerous and increasingly sensitive assignments, the role he now held. He was the field commander responsible for the final execution phase of Operation Epic Fury, when the operation moved from planning into action. When the strike packages were activated, the assets deployed, the coordination windows opened, he was the man on the ground whose decisions would determine whether the operation succeeded or failed. His authority in the execution phase was near absolute. His knowledge of the operational framework was complete. He knew the strike coordinates. He knew the timing windows. He knew the asset positioning, the ingress routes, the abort criteria, and the contingency protocols for every scenario the planners had been able to model. He knew everything that would make Epic Fury work. He had transmitted most of it to Iranian intelligence. The FBI discovered this 72 hours before the operation's execution window opened. The investigation that uncovered the commander did not begin with him. It began with money that didn't move the way money was supposed to move. A routine financial intelligence sweep, one of dozens conducted monthly by the FBI's National Security Financial Crimes Unit as part of a standing counterintelligence program, flagged a transaction pattern involving a holding company registered in Liechtenstein. The company had received 7 wire transfers over 14 months from a source entity that resolved, through a 4-step ownership trace, to a commercial real estate firm in Beirut whose principal shareholders included 2 individuals named in a 2021 classified Treasury Department assessment of Iranian financial facilitation networks. The Liechtenstein company had made 9 outbound transfers during the same period. All 9 had gone to a single beneficiary, a brokerage account registered in the name of a Delaware LLC. The LLC had one disclosed beneficial owner. The disclosure had been filed as required by federal financial transparency regulations. The beneficial owner's name, when it came back from the database query, produced a hit in a separate federal system. The name was associated with a Social Security number. The Social Security number was associated with a federal employee record. The federal employee record belonged to a serving military officer with top-secret/SCI access, not a planning officer, not an analyst, not an intelligence professional, a special operations field commander currently assigned to Epic Fury's execution cell. The financial crimes analyst who made the connection flagged it at 11:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. The flag reached the FBI's Counterintelligence Division Chief by 1:15 p.m. The division chief called the director at 2 p.m. By 4 p.m., a full investigation had been opened under the designation Hollow Sword. Access was restricted to 9 people. The Director of National Intelligence was notified by Secure Channel at 6:30 p.m. Epic Fury's execution window opened in 78 hours. What the investigation established in the first 24 hours of Hollow Sword was enough to confirm the financial connection and enough to understand its implications. It was not yet enough to arrest. The Liechtenstein holding company's connection to Iranian financial facilitation networks was assessed with high confidence. The 2021 Treasury assessment it traced to was specific and detailed. The flow from that company to the Delaware LLC to the commander's brokerage account was documented across 14 months and 9 transfers. The total value, $780,000. A serving Special Operations Officer. $780,000 in payments from a company connected to Iranian financial infrastructure. Over 14 months. The financial case was strong. What the counterintelligence investigation needed to establish before arrest was the operational dimension. Had the commander actually transmitted classified operational information, or had the financial relationship not yet produced intelligence compromise? That question had a 72-hour deadline. If the commander had already transmitted Epic Fury execution details, the coordinates, the timing windows, the asset positioning, and if Iran was acting on that information, the operation could not proceed as designed. If he had not yet transmitted, or if Iran had not yet acted on what he had provided, Epic Fury might still be salvageable. The task force needed to know what Iran already had. NSA technical assets were redirected within 4 hours of the investigation's opening to monitor every signal associated with the commander's known devices, his operational environment, and the communication infrastructure of the Iranian intelligence entities connected to the Liechtenstein company. The monitoring was authorized under an emergency FISA provision that permitted abbreviated review when the intelligence threat involved imminent harm to national security operations. The monitoring produced the answer in 14 hours. On the morning of Day 2 of the investigation, Iranian signals activity, monitored through a separate compartmented NSA program, showed a significant increase in encrypted traffic between the IRGC Intelligence Directorate and its regional operational commands. The traffic was not fully decryptable, but its volume, its timing, and its distribution pattern were consistent with the dissemination of high-value intelligence product to operational units. The timing coincided with a communications event on the commander's personal device, a device he used for personal communication, not classified work, that showed a 22-minute window of activity on an encrypted platform the NSA team identified as modified with a secondary obfuscation layer consistent with IRGC, External Operations Communication Security Tools. 22 minutes. High-volume Iranian signals traffic. The connection was not direct proof, but the task force's assessment, delivered to the director at 7 a.m. on Day 2, was unambiguous. Iran had received something from the commander. In the last 24 hours, the question was no longer whether to arrest. The question was what Iran now knew and how much of Epic Fury could still be executed. The arrest was authorized at 8:45 a.m. Epic Fury's execution window opened in 56 hours. The arrest of a Special Operations Field Commander in the final days before a major classified military operation created operational and legal complexities that the task force had to manage simultaneously. The commander was at an operational staging facility, not a civilian address, not a location where a standard residential arrest could be executed. He was operating under military command authority, surrounded by personnel under his command, in a facility with its own security infrastructure and communication systems. An arrest at the staging facility carried specific risks. The commander's personnel, who had no knowledge of the investigation, could react unpredictably to the appearance of federal agents. The commander himself, if he received any warning of approaching law enforcement through the facility's security systems, would have options for evidence destruction or evasion that a civilian subject would not. and the operational disruption to the Epic Fury execution cell of losing its field commander 48 hours before launch required immediate mitigation that could not be planned until after the arrest. The task force solved the problem by working through military counterintelligence channels. The Army's Counterintelligence Division read into Hollow Sword on Day 2 under emergency compartmentation protocols, coordinated with the commander's immediate superior in the operational chain, who was not a subject of any investigation and whose integrity had been assessed as uncompromised, to arrange a recall to a command facility under the cover of an urgent operational planning requirement. The cover story was specific enough to be plausible and generic enough that the commander could not infer from it that anything was wrong. The commander left the staging facility at 11:30 a.m. for what he believed was a command briefing. He arrived at the command facility at 12:15 p.m. FBI agents and Army counterintelligence officers were waiting in a conference room that the commander was directed to by a duty officer who had been briefed on the cover story and nothing else. The commander walked in. He saw the agents. He saw the Army counterintelligence officers. He saw the badges and the sealed federal warrant on the conference table. He sat down. He did not speak. He did not ask questions. He did not look surprised. He sat down the way a man sits down when he has known for some time that a room like this was somewhere in his future, and has decided in advance to meet it sitting rather than standing. He was informed of the charges and his rights. He invoked his right to counsel without a word. He was placed under federal custody and transported to a secure facility within 90 minutes of the meeting beginning. His personal devices, the one used for classified work and the one used for personal communication, were seized at the command facility. His quarters at the staging facility were secured by Army counterintelligence personnel within 20 minutes of the arrest, before any information about the arrest could reach facility personnel through informal channels. The 22-minute encrypted communication event on his personal device was confirmed, through forensic analysis of the device, to have transmitted a compressed data file whose recovered fragments, the full file was partially encrypted at a secondary layer that resisted immediate decryption, contained structured information consistent with operational parameters, coordinate formats, time notations, and asset identifier codes whose structure matched the classification schema used in Epic Fury's operational documentation. Iran had the coordinates. Iran had the timing windows. The question Epic Fury's command structure now faced was whether those coordinates and windows could still be used. The decision about whether Epic Fury could proceed was made at the National Security Council level within 6 hours of the arrest. The operational analysis was direct. The commander had transmitted coordinate and timing data for the operation's primary strike package. That data was now in Iranian hands. Iranian defensive assets, air defense systems, hardened facility protocols, personnel dispersal procedures, could be positioned or activated in response to that data. If the operation proceeded on its original parameters, it would be executed against a prepared adversary who knew the strike coordinates and the timing. The original parameters could not be used, but the question was not only whether the original parameters could be used. The question was whether the underlying operational objectives, the targets, the strategic goals, the reason Epic Fury had been built over 19 months, could still be achieved through modified parameters. The answer, assessed by the Joint Staff and presented to the NSC in an emergency briefing that ran for 4 hours, was yes, with modifications, at higher operational risk, with reduced effectiveness against some target categories, not the operation that had been designed. A degraded version of it, rebuilt in 48 hours with modified coordinates, modified timing windows, and a strike package that accounted for the probability that Iranian defenses had been repositioned in response to what the commander had transmitted. The execution window opened on schedule. The modified operation proceeded. What happened is classified. What is acknowledged? The operation occurred. Its results fell short of the original assessment in specific categories that remain classified. It exceeded the original assessment in others. The evaluation of whether Epic Fury ultimately achieved its strategic objectives, accounting for the compromise that had degraded its original parameters, is an ongoing, classified assessment that will not be publicly resolved. The commander's transmission did not stop Epic Fury. It changed it. And the full cost of that change is a number that belongs to the classified record. The damage assessment for Hollow Sword required 12 weeks and the participation of 6 intelligence and military counterintelligence agencies. The commander's access had not been limited to Epic Fury. His position in the special operations structure had given him, over 19 years of increasing seniority, knowledge of operational frameworks, source networks, and force capability assessments that extended well beyond the current operation. The assessment's findings on the pre-Epic Fury period were the most troubling element of its conclusions. The Liechtenstein financial trail covered 14 months, but the assessment found evidence suggesting that the relationship between the commander and the Iranian financial facilitation network had begun earlier. How much earlier could not be definitively established from the financial evidence alone. The commander's cooperation in post-arrest interviews was, to use the assessment team's characterization, selective. He confirmed the financial relationship. He confirmed the most recent transmission. He declined to discuss the full history of the relationship or the complete scope of what he had transmitted over time. His selective cooperation, providing enough to avoid the most severe additional charges, withholding enough to limit the government's ability to fully reconstruct the damage, was itself a form of operational discipline. He was managing his exposure the way someone manages it who understands the legal architecture of the case against him, and has calculated precisely how much cooperation is necessary. The assessment's conclusion on the scope of the long-term damage was stated as a range rather than a specific figure. The lower bound of the range represented what could be established from documented evidence. The upper bound represented what was plausible given the commander's access history and the assessed duration of the relationship. Both ends of the range were classified. The operational impact on current and near-future special operations capability in the regional theater was assessed as significant and requiring specific mitigations that are not publicly described. Federal charges were filed within 28 days of the arrest. The charge list reflected both the confirmed intelligence compromise and the attempted mitigation of full accountability through selective cooperation. Counts included espionage under 18 U.S.C., Section 794, conspiracy to commit espionage, aiding the enemy under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, a charge whose application to a serving officer and whose potential for capital sentencing made it the most serious element of the charging document, and bribery of a public official in connection with the financial payments received through the Liechtenstein holding company structure. The aiding the enemy charge under UCMJ was significant. It reflected the government's assessment that the transmission of operational coordinates and timing windows to an adversary power in the final 72 hours before a military operation's execution constituted more than espionage. It constituted direct assistance to a force engaged against American military personnel and interests. The charge carries a maximum sentence of death. The commander was held at a military detention facility pending proceedings. His attorneys filed a motion challenging the application of the UCMJ aiding the enemy charge alongside the civilian espionage statutes, arguing that the charges could not be pursued simultaneously in both military and civilian jurisdictions. The motion was under review. He had not, as of the filing date, provided any additional cooperation beyond his initial selective disclosures. The financial transaction that had opened the investigation, the Liechtenstein Holding Company, the Beirut real estate firm, the 9 transfers to the Delaware LLC, had been identified by an analyst conducting a routine sweep. The kind of sweep that generates dozens of low-priority flags every month. The kind that most analysts work through quickly, looking for obvious patterns, closing out the ones that don't immediately develop, moving on to the next queue. This analyst did not move on. The Liechtenstein Company's ownership trace was 4 steps long. Most analysts working a routine sweep with a full queue behind it stop at 2 steps. Tracing to beneficial ownership through 4 shell layers is time-consuming, requires coordination with international financial intelligence partners, and produces a result that, in most cases, resolves into a legitimate explanation. This analyst ran all 4 steps. Step 4 produced the Treasury Assessment Hit. The Treasury Assessment Hit produced the Military Officer Connection. The Military Officer Connection produced Hollow Sword. 4 steps. Hours of trace work on a flag that most analysts would have closed at step 2. 72 hours before Epic Fury's execution window. 19 years of a career built in the most sensitive spaces of American special operations. $780,000 in Iranian payments. Coordinates and timing windows in Iranian hands. And an analyst who ran 1 more step in an ownership trace when the protocol would have allowed stopping 2 steps earlier. That step, the 4th step, the one that didn't need to be taken, the one that produced a result nobody expected, is what opened the investigation, authorized the arrest, and gave Epic Fury a chance to proceed in modified form rather than execute against a fully prepared adversary that knew exactly where the strikes were coming from and exactly when. It was not enough to prevent all the damage. The coordinates had already been transmitted. The timing windows were in Iranian hands. The operation that Epic Fury had been designed to be, 19 months of planning, intelligence collection, coalition building, and operational preparation, could not be fully recovered in 48 hours. But it was not abandoned. It was not canceled. It was rebuilt in the time that remained by people who understood what had been lost and worked with what remained. The operation occurred, that outcome. The operation occurring at all, in any form, achieving any of its objectives, depended on the investigation opening when it did, on the arrest happening before the execution window rather than after, on the 48 hours of modified planning that the arrest had made possible. All of that depended on the 4th step. 72 hours, the time remaining before Epic Fury's execution window when the arrest was made. 19 years. The commander's career in American Special Operations before the arrest. $780,000. Total payments received through the Liechtenstein financial infrastructure over 14 months. 14 months. The documented duration of the financial relationship, assessed as likely longer, 22 minutes. The duration of the transmission event on the commander's personal device the night before his arrest, 9. Transfers from the Liechtenstein Company to the Delaware LLC over 14 months, 4. Steps in the ownership trace that the financial crimes analyst ran on a routine sweep flag. 1 analyst, 1 flag, One extra step in a trace that protocol did not require. The operation proceeded. Because of that step, that was enough.